If you work in the community or welfare sector, it's likely you've heard the term theory into practice, but actually doing that can be really tricky. My name is Catherine and I'm a social worker, and in this video we're going to talk about all of the theories that you would have learned at university and how do we apply theory into practice. When we apply theory into practice, we actually are using evidence-based strategies in a way that's going to help your clients achieve better outcomes so you can help clients in your community. Before we jump in, I just want to highlight that we have a bunch of free resources available at our website, figjamoz.com, that are linked below in the bio. So if you are interested in any of our information or resources, go check them out after you finish the video. So let's start with talking about what is theory into practice and why is it important. So theory into practice is actually defined as taking a theory or theoretical knowledge or model or intervention and applying that across into your practice when you're working with clients, families, groups, communities, whatever the practice demographic is that you work with. It's about taking that knowledge that exists in a theory and applying it across when you do your work. So that process is actually quite simple, but in doing that, you need to be able to recall theory and understand the principles of theories and how they work in practice. And that's the bit that takes quite a bit of reflection and learning to actually get a handle on it. So why is theory into practice important then? Well, for social workers, it really is the fundamental part of being a social worker. It's what sets us apart from other allied health and community services professionals. We as social workers really believe that applying a theory into practice is the way in which we actually work. And by consciously and intentionally using theory, we're going to create change for our clients. I once heard an analogy that I found really useful in my early years as a social worker, where someone suggested that we actually have almost like a second brain that exists off to the side, where all of the theories are swirling around all the time. And when we're working with a client, as we identify their needs or strengths or struggles, we actually start to pull the theories that we know into our regular brain from the second social worker brain to start applying that in practice. So one of the reasons why it is so important is because we want to have that knowledge base and make sure that we're doing social work properly in practice. The second reason we want to make sure that it's so important in practice is because it provides us with a really solid evidence base. When we use theory into practice, we actually can be confident that the information and the strategies we're using have been tried and tested in research, and more often than not have been successful in a number of different occasions. It also means that that evidence base gives us an opportunity to be able to apply this with our clients and be able to really be confident in the type of care we're giving to our clients. It's also really important because we want to make sure that between me as a social worker and someone else as a social worker, if we're using the same intervention, we're going to have a relatively consistent approach and a relatively similar practice. It's not meaning that we're going to be the same, but if we're both using systems approaches, we're both going to be probably doing similar things to try and understand information or to provide an intervention with that client. So it gives us a bit of consistency across the board too. But fundamentally, it really goes towards the reliability and effectiveness of your social work practice, and make sure that when you're working with clients, you really are going to be someone who's trustworthy, reliable, and you're going to have something behind you that's a bit of an evidence base to support what you're saying and what you're doing, which makes your work really, really defendable if you ever have any questions asked about your work, which is fundamentally why it is so critical when we work with people, particularly in vulnerable communities. But in order to actually implement theory into practice, we need to know what the theories are, right? So understanding what theories are and understanding the differences between theories, sub-theories, interventions, models is almost a really big brain boggling situation. We have a couple of resources on our website that separate some of these into some categories with some examples. But before we jump into what some of the common social work theories are, I just want to highlight that every discipline in our world will have theories involved. So there's going to be theories that are appropriate to the science discipline. There's going to be theories that are appropriate to the law discipline. There's going to be theories that are specific to education. And there is going to be some that overlap with our social work theories, okay? So some of our social work theories that we often will use will come up in other disciplines in the same way that we can also steal theories from other disciplines and adopt them into social work. Some of those are not going to be as critical. I'm sure you can understand that some science theories about laws of motion are not going to be as appropriate when we're working directly with clients in a social work setting. However, there are going to be some theories across education, business, law, and even some medicinal theories that are going to be useful for us depending on what clients we're working with and how we're working with them. In this part of the video, I'm only going to share a couple of the really big social work theories that are really important across your practice, typically the ones that we learn in social work school, or typically the ones that are quite popular across health and community services and that do come up quite a lot. And these are behaviorism, systems theory, psychodynamic and psychoanalytic theories, humanistic theories, and critical theories. They are some of our really big theories that we're going to unpack a little bit further in a moment. Noting that these theories are some of the really large theories, and there are a bunch of other theories that are kind of sub to these. For example, trauma theory draws some information from social learning theory or behaviorism, and also from humanistic theories as well. So trauma theory is a great example of a sub-theory because it draws concepts from some of those larger theoretical constructs. You also may have heard of a theory called constructivism, and that's one that's quite across a lot of educational backgrounds and also research-based. So yes, it is a theory that we can adopt in social work, but we tend to not use that one as frequently because our clients often don't fit that kind of mold, and it doesn't offer us with models and skills. It's more of a way that we understand our clients. So there's a couple of things there just to be mindful of. So let's jump into what each of those theories are and how they operate. So starting with behaviorism or social learning theory, what we really understand about this particular theory is that it really is based on understanding that our clients are going to be shaped by their experience and what happens to them. We understand that their behavior is going to be a direct cause of their experiences, of what they have been through, and those sorts of things. So a lot of the time, behaviorism, social learning theory is where we get a lot of our education theories from and how we understand how we can communicate things in an educational base. It's also where we understand information about how trauma affects the future. There is a little bit of physiology associated with that also, but there's a lot of roots in behaviorism for a lot of those sorts of things. The key to behaviorism is knowing that there are a bunch of theorists and sub-theories as a part of behaviorism that adopt little versions of that series of events. For example, Piaget is one of the behaviorist theorists, but he talks a lot about schemas and these ideas that our experiences form little blocks that form our understanding of the world. So as we see adults and other people interact with the world, we create these schema blocks that then inform how we approach the world as an adult. However, Piaget is not the only behaviorism theorist. So we need to be careful about how do we understand behaviorism as a whole, and then looking at each of those theorists in detail. So when you think of behaviorism, I want you to remember that we're understanding the person's behavior is a result of their experience, okay? And we'll talk more about what the sub-theories and interventions and models that match behaviorism are in a different video because there's too much to go into right now when we're trying to look at theory into practice. Our next theory we're going to just chat briefly about is systems theory. And often people will go straight to Yuri Bronfenbrenner as the idea of systems theory, and he absolutely created a lot of space for systems theory. And he talks about the idea that in a person's life, there are all different types of systems they're involved with. These systems are going to be both physical and non-physical as well. So we want to think about for example, what are the people that are involved in someone's life, but also some of the non-physical ideas around what sort of systems might they be involved in. If they're a woman, they'll be part of the female system and those sorts of things. So we can think about that in some different contexts. The easiest way to apply systems theory in practice is by considering the other people in someone's life and considering an eco-map process and understanding the types of relationships. We call an eco-map ecological systems theory, where we're trying to map the ecology of the person. But we might integrate something called strategic systems theory when we're trying to understand the connections between those people within that still one system, right? So there's ecological systems theory and strategic systems theory. And there is another type of systems theory that we're not going to go into today because it is a little too complex to try and explain in just one video. So we have systems theories that we often use quite frequently in practice when we're trying to understand someone's social, emotional context and what are the external things that influence them in their lives. Systems theory has a lot of basis across other disciplines as well. As I'm sure you've probably already made the connection that ecology is a science term. So ecology often use an ecological systems perspective, and so understanding what different animals operate in the same environment. Now, when we think about our next group of theories, which are our psychodynamic and psychoanalytic theories, I want you to think about Freud and Jung. So these are our two theorists that really defined these particular theories. Now, psychodynamic theory is really based on a lot of Freud's work, where we talk about the ego, the subconscious, the unconscious mind, all of those sorts of elements. What are our values and desires on an unconscious level, and how do they manifest in practice? When we look at our clients from a perspective of understanding that, from a mental health perspective, it can be really, really valuable. Okay, so psychoanalytic theory often is really useful in understanding people's drivers and their cognitions and those sorts of things, and particularly in understanding what's hidden in the unconscious or subconscious and what is in the conscious mind. And Freud was a really key researcher across the psychodynamic principles. Psychoanalytic processes almost are very similar to the psychodynamic process. However, psychoanalytic theorists really focused on analyzing the psyche as opposed to looking at that subconscious, unconscious. It was about the dynamics that the brain perpetuated. So things like transactional analysis, where we look at how power is distributed between people and how people adopt power, and the idea around what does that create within relationships, is an example of a sub-theory of psychoanalysis. And in psychoanalysis, we're really just focusing on analyzing what the brain is doing. So psyche, brain analysis. Yeah. So we group psychoanalysis and psychodynamic principles together because a lot of the theorists overlap. So next we're going to just touch on humanism. Humanism is the idea that we're looking at the person in their context. We're looking at the person as the center of their own life, and we're treating them with dignity and respect. And we're obviously going to do that across all of our different theories. But in terms of humanism, we're really going to be looking at what is this person's desire. So regardless of external influences, regardless of their experience to some extent, what do they want and how do they want to achieve that? We're really operating on a person-centered level, and person-centered approaches are a sub-modality of humanism. However, humanism really is all about that person, their dignity, their identity, and their own journey through life. And a lot of our stages of change and life development stages exist within the humanism bracket. Finally, we're just going to touch on critical theories, and these are some of our most modern theories we use across social work. And critical theories really are about being critical of our society or systems that we work in and operate in. And now some of the critical theories that you would have heard of are things like feminism or Marxism or anti-oppressive practice. And all of those really go to challenge societal or systemic ideas or concepts. Right? So we understand that feminism is a understanding of theory where we're trying to understand how female and feminine ideas can be integrated more into society versus historically, we understand that our society has been quite patriarchal, and so feminism is trying to correct that injustice. So when we think of critical theories, we want to think about theories that critique society and try to create change against for vulnerable groups. So to try and make sure that those who have been oppressed are now no longer oppressed. So that's a bit of a summary of some of the theories you'll come across in practice most commonly, and a really brief definition of them. Obviously, there is so much more to learn, and if you are interested in more info, as I said, we have a heap of stuff on our website, but we're hopefully going to have lots more videos about different theories and how they work independently, so you can really get your teeth into that. I'd also recommend reading some books if you are interested in any of those sorts of things, and I will pop some recommendations in our bio below. So let's talk about next how we can actually implement some of these theories that we've just talked about into practice and what that actually looks like for you as a social worker or caseworker in this space. So before we start really putting theory into practice, a way that I like to work out what theories I'm actually going to use in practice is through using a type of reflective tool. Now, for you as a worker and for me as a worker, those reflective tools and what we're going to be doing in our reflections are likely going to be very different. And that's okay, because that's how we all are able to come together and be diverse practitioners within the social work sector. Now, when you're choosing a reflective tool or reflective model of practice, I'd recommend doing some research around what's out there and what aligns best with your practice framework and your experiences. For me, I often will go towards Kolb's model of reflective practice or Gibbs' model of reflective practice. And both of these I find just as valuable, but in different settings. For the purpose of this video, we're going to talk through Kolb's, which is a little bit simpler to understand and also has a lot of basis in scientific theory. And if you're new to me, you'll know that, if you're new to me, you won't know yet, but I previously was a scientist. And so for me, having that process and understanding of what I'm going to do and have that really clear scientific reflection is very important to me in my practice as a social worker. So let's talk about Kolb's model. In Kolb's model, it argues that you start with a concrete experience. You want to have an interaction or a conversation with your client, or have an experience where you've read their history, where you have something concrete to base this on. So following that concrete experience, you want to reflect on the things that went well and the things that didn't go well, and what were the things that you learned from that. So you have like a bit of reflective observation occurring at the second phase. You can use a bunch of different tools to actually do this. You might have some worksheets that are available online, or you might just do this simply in your head. What I find is that a lot of people actually automatically do this following a concrete experience, but it's the next two steps that we often miss out. And that's where we're really having the gap in implementing our theory into practice. So after we've done our reflection, we want our next question to ourselves to be, okay, if I was actually to create change, what does that look like? And that's a process called abstract conceptualization. So it's almost as though we're imagining that something is happening. We want to imagine that this is already occurring. We're already putting this theory into practice. What's that going to look like? Would that be helpful? What would I get out of it? What are some of those things that would go into it? After we've done the abstract conceptualization and we've almost mapped the theory we want to use and how we're going to implement it and what principles we're going to draw on in that space, we're then going to do something called active experimentation. So that's when you then take that theory and the principles that you've already developed in abstract conceptualization, and then you take it and implement it across with your client or in the report you're writing or with your business. And in doing so, you're going to take the ideas that came in abstract conceptualization and just apply them in real life. And what you're doing there is you're actually trying this out and you're doing theory into practice. The abstract conceptualization stage is so important for us as social workers and caseworkers to actually look at how do these theories apply in practice, so that when we hit the active experimentation phase, we know what we're doing. Okay, so don't skip the active abstract conceptualization phase. After we've done our active experimentation, we then would return back to the initial phase of Kolb's model, where we then have a new concrete experience that we can reflect on. So we've just had our active experimentation occur with our intentional theory, and now we want to reflect again on that concrete experience that we had to then continue the process again. And sometimes what you'll find is in that reflection phase, you're like, that theory actually worked so well for me, but now I want to take it in a different direction with a different principle from the same theory, or a different approach, or I might use a model, or I might use an intervention. So often, even if we're staying with the same theory, we often will choose slightly different versions of it to present to our clients in whatever phase that might be. So if you've done Kolb's reflection and you've implemented some theory into practice and you've done that really well, how do you then prove that you've done theory into practice? It's a really tricky space because I often see social workers interact with clients in a really theoretically informed manner, and then they're not quantifying what they're doing to actually get the knowledge and credit and validity of what they've actually done. And so what's really important is in your follow-up and case noting of the event, you want to make sure that you're using the language of the theory in that document. You want to make sure that you're referencing some of the principles that you found in your abstract conceptualization in things like your pre-work. So, for example, if you're a mental health clinician and you're running sessions for people, you want to make sure that you're doing a pre-session plan. And in the pre-session plan is your perfect opportunity to map out some of the abstract conceptualization stuff of what are the theories you're planning on using, how will you use them, what are some of the different concepts you're going to adopt within that session. Then when you actually conduct the session and then you have notes afterwards, you can then write about what those theories did and how they were effective. For example, I used systems theory to complete an eco map with the client. The client identified through strategic systems theory that relationships with family members were challenging due to X, Y, and Z. And in doing all of those things, you're quantifying your theory into practice and showing that you actually are doing these things. If you don't work in the mental health field and you don't necessarily have to do a pre-session plan, this might look a little different. And it might just look like a couple of dot points before you meet with a team or before you meet with a client. And you can just note down some of the theories and what your conceptual plan is for them, the abstract conceptualization step. After your meeting with a client, with a team, with a business, you want to make sure that you are using the theoretical language in your case noting and follow-up. And that's going to be how you really provide evidence that you're using theory in practice. Because if you're just doing the reflective stage, you're doing that great and your clients are probably getting amazing support, but you're not quantifying what you're actually doing as a social worker to make sure that your theory is coming across into practice. So that is really a critical part of honoring your knowledge and skills and capability in the social work profession. So that's about it. In this video, we've covered all of the things that you'll need to start a basic theory into practice. So we touched on what are some of the things about theory into practice that make it unique and how do we actually understand what it is and why it's important. We also touched on some of the basic understanding and principles of some of the big social work theories that exist. We then talked a little bit about using a reflective model, a reflective cycle to adopt theory into practice. And I showed you my personal favorite reflective tool, which is Kolb's model of reflective practice. And finally, we talked about how to provide that evidence to make sure that you're getting the proper recognition for really doing a great job with using theory into practice. And it's not going to end here. So implementing theory into practice is going to be a lifelong learning event for you. This is really the basis of how we start to do this sort of stuff. And as we implement more theories and models and interventions, it just gets even more complex. So if you are interested in more information around that sort of stuff, head to our website. We have a bunch of resources that are available for you, and you can download those there. Otherwise, let us know if there's any other information you would like.